politics and politicians are complicated. They don't fit the clean, straight lines and clever strategies which people in politics insist upon. And the challenges facing this country and the solutions we might offer are complicated too. All of which brings me back to Keir Starmer. Now, lots of people in this room will have disagreements with him on this or that issue. I do too. But what my book does, and I hope if anybody wants to buy it, they can do so. There's Jess at the back who will wave now. Jess, wave. She has copies of my book for sale. What my book tries to do, I hope, is describe someone who's not a typical politician. And as such, I think there's a sort of bigger, it sort of tries to answer a bigger paradox, which we're always being told in this country that we hate politicians, and yet everyone in politics I know sort of wrings their hands and bewails the fact that he's not more of a politician. He is messy. His story is messy. He's not personally messy, he's quite tidy, but his story is messy. It's nuanced, like most people are, and like most politicians are not usually allowed to be. The difference, I think, is that he has stubbornly, instinctively resisted and defied definition. And that's made it harder for him in some ways to be a leader, but I think it explains some of the success he's had as one. The problem we've had so often in recent years, with those three-word slogans, take back control, get Brexit done, crush the saboteurs, whatever you want, they're not really serving us well. And I don't think politics should be made to fit these clean dividing lines. It's not really what this country's like. And Starmer's backstory has loose ends that he hasn't always wanted to discuss, and to the extent they've been laid bare in the book I've just written, is a result of a process that I promise you has been more like pulling teeth than flashing the shiny white ones we usually associate with politicians. Starmer doesn't like the word vision. And ordinary people don't have visions. I mean, if I heard someone outside in the street saying, I've just had a vision, I'd direct them to UCH rather than to Downing Street. He doesn't think the ambition that Labour has for government can be summed up in three-word slogans. And the policies that he will pursue, if he's given the chance, won't always be headline-grabbing, spectacular, or even easily understood. Now, I don't pretend to understand everything or know everything about him. A lot of his story remains out of sight, and much of it, especially if he becomes PM, has not yet happened. But if you do go and see Jess at the end and buy this book, I think you'll have got the most authoritative version of him that you're going to get for a while. And what most people who've read it have said to me is that what they thought they knew about him, that he's predictable and dull and boring, isn't really true. Now, we start with his childhood, which is often summed up with that line, my dad was a toolmaker, my mum was a nurse, and people's eyes roll back when he says that. But the reality behind that line is this really tightly bound environment, an austere, scary father who couldn't tell his son he was proud of him. His dad's rigidity and resentment in the story about class in the 70s. Being a toolmaker meant something if you lived in Bolton or Burnley. It didn't mean anything in Surrey, it just meant you worked in a factory. There was a sick mother in terrible, increasing pain from a horrible disease that made her joints swell and her immunity system attack itself. A brother with special educational needs, so that he was dismissed and picked upon. Two sisters that never matched Keir Starmer's achievements, and he left behind as he went off to grammar school, then university. Endless dogs, donkeys, no TV, just 3 bedrooms. There wasn't much room for him to learn to emote. Explains why he doesn't do it easily now. It explains his relentlessness, his desire to get on and get out. It explains why he's the first Labour leader in a generation to talk about class and snobbery. and why he has a central mission now to break down these barriers of opportunity, to shatter the class ceiling. And my book talks about other influences too. Football, that's genuine. Lots of politicians put it on. One of Starmer's friends tells me that if he wants to look normal, he probably needs to tone the football side down because it's quite obsessive. He has proper friends, old friends, a deep circle of them. He has the pub. I've seen lots of politicians in pubs, and they usually go behind the bar and pull a pint badly for the cameras. Starmer blends in with other middle-aged men into the background better than any politician I've seen, including Nigel Farage. Family, a sense of place. His wallet has these words: "Take me home to Kentish Town and Boston it." Now, he needs these things more than most politicians because they anchor him, because unlike most politicians, I don't think he has a rigid ideology. He has values which, like most people's values, aren't easily codified and structured. He changes his mind, like people do. Like common law is iterative, although roads we have in this country bend around hillsides to fit into the folds of the landscape. He bends and swerves. He doesn't have straight lines, but he generally gets there in the end. And there's another column in the Sunday Times today by Matthew Said suggesting that the appeal of Lee Anderson and George Galloway is because this country is lurching further and faster into the far left or the far right, Islamicists, angry white voters, culture wars. I'm not sure if that's correct. I don't think it explains why this rather unideological Labour Party now has a 20-point lead, while an increasingly angry, ideological Tory party seems to have lost the plot. But that lead is still a mystery to lots of people here and elsewhere. Where's the charisma? What does he really stand for? Where's the inspiration? Part of the problem for him, I think, is that he had another career before he entered Parliament, a long career, 30 years as a lawyer, and you don't win cases on the basis of charisma. You win them on points of fact and evidence. He never won a case on the basis that he lived in a pebble-dash semi and his dad was a toolmaker. He doesn't like having to do these things. It's not how he's learned to be himself. And I think he struggled sometimes in politics. He doesn't have some of the skills you would associate with a successful leader. Doesn't always get credit enough for improving, because he learns and he's relentless. But it's painful for him. He doesn't like politics. He doesn't like factions. He doesn't like transactional deals. He doesn't go to the Commons bar. He doesn't usually even have politicians or advisors back to his house. Angela Rayner, his deputy, says he's the least political person she knows in politics, which is quite an odd thing if you're leader of the Labour Party. And that can be a weakness. A lot of politics is about building alliances. It can be a strength, though, because not only does it keep him rooted in the ordinary and the everyday, it means he can move faster, unburdened by obligation and baggage. And that's another difference which I think is underestimated about him. He is breathtakingly ruthless. He does what he has to do. And there's quite a lot of opponents who have underestimated him in that respect, and a lot of them are now ex-politicians. I don't think he has Starmer rights. I don't think there's anything such as a Starmerism. I was trying to push him on this, one of the last meetings we had before the book was published. And I was waiting outside his house, and this huge convoy of vehicles turns up, police security vehicles, and sort of women walking their dogs are rather startled. And he gets in, and the house is freezing because the boiler's broken and making a weird noise. And it's to get the plumber. The interview is constantly interrupted by making tea for the plumber. Then his kids come home. And then he's just talking about Middle East peace processes, and his cat gets in a fight outside in the garden and comes and sorts it out, and he comes up bleeding from one hand. And I'm saying, isn't really Starmerism some new relationship between the state and citizens and private sector? Because that is a difference. And he says, oh, I don't know. And then he goes into an anecdote involving a conversation he had with Gordon Brown about how business had changed since the financial crisis. And then his friend Colin, he was going to meet in the pub that night, who works for Procter & Gamble, knows a lot about business, says this too. And then he talks about Arsenal's community programme and how it does lots of work in the community. And I thought that was very Starmer-ish, explaining this new relationship with the state through a former Prime Minister, his mate down the pub and his football team. But he said, look, I don't care if there's a Starmerism, I just want to get things done. At which point his wife, who's arrived, says, if you really want to get things done, you can start by ordering a takeaway because there's no food in the fridge. And that extraordinary ordinariness, I think, sets him apart from a lot of the politics we've had in recent years. Watching him is like, you stand back, it's like he takes 2 steps forward, 1 sideways, 1 back, 2 sideways, another step forward. You can think, what the fuck is he doing? What he's doing is he's crossing a minefield. And our politics has been hardwired so long for the great grand gesture, charging across the minefield, waving a flag and a sword. And then we report how they're blown to smithereens. That's the best way to cross a minefield. And it doesn't always look elegant, it doesn't look heroic, it doesn't look inspiring, but it gets you there in the end. And I think somehow in an appreciation of nuance and complexity, which aren't just about straight lines, there is a potential to find pockets of space to establish a new consensus. And I'm not some sort of fanboy. I know he's not perfect. He's not a perfect politician. I don't agree with him on everything, least of all Europe. And there's so much that can go wrong. External factors, internal factors, the economy, the £19 billion of spending cuts the government have programmed into the economy for the next 2 years. But the same people who said that when he became Labour leader, he had no chance of winning the next election, absolutely zero, 10-year, 15-year project, are often the same people writing columns in Sunday papers now who say he's got no chance of bringing change if he becomes Prime Minister. And maybe we should all show a little bit more humility, because he's changed Labour Party at a rate of knots while being seen as dull and reassuring. And that may be some sort of superpower. We'll see.